the development has been remarkable. It could have been more remarkable if there hadn't been confrontational politics. Already been working in Bihar in India on a village development program following the very severe Bihar famine of 1966-1967, and then to begin with, when the cyclone of November 1970 took place. The group of volunteers, we were all technical volunteers, civil engineers, agriculturalists like myself, and we were based in 4 different ashrams, in Gandhian ashrams in Bihar. So we were actually asked to stand by to be available to come to then East Pakistan following the cyclone, but we never actually needed to come, but by early 1971, we heard about the tension and the political following the election of December 1970. We didn't get accurate or detailed news. We got some news by BBC radio, but not very good news through the Indian newspapers. But there was, in the town I was staying in Bihar, Gaya, there was a Bengali community, and some of them had links. They had originally, their families had been in this part of Bengal. So they were getting very excited as well as tense, because some of them still had relations in East Pakistan. So when Bangabandhu's speech of March the 7th took place, the group of Bengalis there, they said they were quite convinced that Bangladesh, now we will have Bangladesh. They said then, and I thought they were crazy, because it was difficult to understand that, but they were quite clear that it was going to happen. But then Oxfam had a regional office based in Bihar, but in a place called Ranchi, and it covered eastern India and East Pakistan at that time. And then soon after the crackdown, March the 25th onwards, then there were telegrams coming from organizations in the border areas, like mission hospitals or 1 or 2 Gandhian ashrams also, sending telegrams that so many thousand refugees had come across the border, and they were in the compound of the hospital or the organization, and what to do and how can we give them relief and so on. So then we were asked to move to Calcutta and the border areas to follow up these stories, because And then we went to places like Benapole, Bongaon, and found 20,000 or 30,000 people coming per day. And we would send messages to Oxfam UK that this is a very serious situation. And they would think that the telegram operator had added a 0 to the figures, so they didn't believe it. So, but gradually, the Oxfam group in Calcutta got a bit organized, and then having first supported in a day-to-day way organizations like Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. They were going out with medically trained sisters in the camps and so on. But then we had this very close connection with Gandhian organization, Gandhi Peace Foundation. So then we worked out that all the foreign aid organizations that were flying in to Calcutta, they were working near to Calcutta. They were working particularly in the huge refugee camp in the area which is now Salt Lake. Salt Lake was like a sort of a second part of Calcutta being set up. It had been laid out at that time, and with great big concrete drain pipes ready to put in the ground. And so eventually about 250,000, 250,000 refugees came there, and some of them were living inside these drain pipes. And a lot of relief organizations concentrated there and nearby, and we decided that we should work further away from Calcutta. And because at the beginning we decided with our Indian friends that we don't need hundreds of white faces flying in from abroad, people who may be medically or otherwise qualified, but they don't know India, they don't know the language. So what is the use? And very expensive. So we said to Oxfam headquarters, no to foreigners flying in. And then we luckily, the daughter of a Gandhian leader, Narayan Desai, and Narayan Desai is one of the people who was honoured by the government of Bangladesh with this. So his daughter was a final year medical student at one of the Calcutta medical colleges, Nil Ratan Sakar Medical College. And so we went to meet her, and then with her fellow students, then they organized that they would go out every day to the camps. Then they and we talked to the college authorities to see whether their practical work, their voluntary work, would be recognized as part of their MBBS practical social and preventive medicine. So then that had to be authorized by the Calcutta University authorities, and they did that. And then because it became official, then the other Calcutta medical colleges got involved as well. And not only that, but when this news spread further afield, we had teams of doctors, medical students and doctors and professors coming from Bombay medical colleges and from the Cuttack Medical College in Orissa. And they would come from Bombay, they would come for a month, and then they would go back and get replaced by another batch. So we had eventually a total of hundreds of medical students working in camps, not just near Calcutta, but in Jalpaiguri, in West Dinajpur, even in Tripura. So it was quite a remarkable operation like that. The government of India was supplying the basic shelter and basic foodstuffs, you know, rice, dal, and oil, and some other things, and then so we were supplementing, and we were particularly high protein food for malnourished children, and then we were doing a lot on the sanitation and clothing, blankets, things like that. And that is quite a big operation when you are getting shari and lungi and ganji and children's clothes for 600,000 people. I mean, that's quite a big thing, and then you have to get different size clothes for different age children and so on. So it was quite complicated, and very, very difficult to arrange the delivery of the relief supplies, because, for instance, if you send a truck from Calcutta round to Agartala, right round, I mean, it was taking sometimes 10 days, particularly during the monsoon. And, of course, later on, the roads were kept open priority-wise for the Indian Army vehicles moving at that time, later in November and so on. So that was another problem. And so occasionally we hired old transport planes from the Second World War. There were some old Dakota cargo planes, and we would send relief supplies to Cooch Behar, where there was a landing strip which used to belong to the Maharaja of Cooch Behar, and so relief supplies were sent that way. So it was a very, very difficult situation in terms of organization and operation, and of course there were no mobile phones then. It was the 20th of January. Yeah, that was just 10 days after he came back. And the memory I have is that we drove very slowly because the road was full of people walking back. There were some trucks, but a lot of people were walking. And we had, through the organizations we were supporting in Bongaon, so they were handing out family packs of dry food to carry on the way to the returning Bangladeshis. But still, some of them had a long way to go. So we drove very slowly, and we spent the night in a mission hospital in Jessore, where one Italian, he was a medical doctor but also a Catholic father. He had been killed by the Pakistanis because he had been helping the wounded Mukti Bahini during the war. So, but Oxfam had supported that mission hospital in their community health work. So we had a connection there, so we stayed the night. Then we drove further on, but we didn't reach. We had great problem at the ferry crossing, and then didn't reach Dhaka until about midnight. That was the second day. At that time, of course, we saw all the damage on the way, hundreds of villages burnt down, and then bridges and culverts blown up, and then that created a problem for crossing some places. The Indian Army had put the temporary Bailey bridges, as they call them, across some places. And then of course, a long queue at the ferry crossing. And there were Indian Army personnel keeping the queue in order, but they were doing it very quietly. They were not bossing it. It was actually, they were doing it very in a friendly way, which was very very interesting to see, because it was there were a lot of excited Bangladeshis, and they wanted to get on the ferry, but everything had to be handled carefully. When we actually came into Dhaka, there were no people anywhere, nobody on the road, no vehicles on the road, and we didn't know, but there was a curfew. They had kept a curfew. I think it was from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. or something like that. And we had no knowledge of that, and we were driving past the old airport, opposite the Prime Minister's office now. And then suddenly we were surrounded by police and military and so on. So then we had to explain who we were, and then they escorted us to the Purbani Hotel. In January there was a lot of excitement, and we've got our own country and so on. Then because I had met Tajuddin a number of times in Calcutta, then he arranged for me to meet Bangabandhu. And there were hundreds of people wanting to meet Bangabandhu, so we thought maybe it's just what should we say, a formality. I mean, but then Tajuddin had obviously briefed Bangabandhu about Oxfam's work or something. So then we had a discussion which was much longer than I expected. And basically, I said I wanted to seek his advice about what a small organization like Oxfam could do with all the bigger problems of Bangladesh. So he he took his pipe out of his mouth and pointed at me and said, "How did you come here, young man?" And so I said, well, I had driven from Calcutta, and then then he said, I was going to tell him something more, but he said, "Then you have seen more of my country than I have, because I've been in jail for the last 9 months. So please tell me what you think my country needs," which is quite an interesting way. I mean, very much a politician talking like that. So then he said, "What did you see?" And then I talked about as what I've said about the burnt out villages and so on. And I said that for ferries and bridges, that's more like a bilateral or multilateral program. And then he said, no, ferries are the lifeblood of my country because of the communication being destroyed and so on. If you think you cannot buy new ferries, see whether you can help repair the ones that can be repaired. So then he instructed his private secretary and other people that make sure they visit the Inland Waterways Authority. So then, and then the last thing he said was that when we got up to say goodbye, and he said, he put his arm round me and said, "Tell me, how was it in the refugee camps?" I mean, because he had really no knowledge. Even when he was in captivity, he didn't know what was happening. And I said, well, it was very difficult, and there were lots of children who didn't survive, and that was the worst thing, that we couldn't save so many children. And basically he said, well, thank you for coming to see me, and thank you for all you are doing for Bangladesh. I mean, it was a very emotional sort of meeting. And talking about it 50 years later, it's also quite emotional. And then eventually we were able to get money to repair quite a number of ferries and purchase 3 new ferries, which were what they called roll-on, roll-off ferries. As I was saying, there was in January 1972, there was a lot of excitement, but by March, when the civil servants had somehow got to some extent established, and the UN-type people had been doing their assessment, then we had Oxfam's head of overseas aid. He was a former FAO, UN person. So when he was here in March and he wrote his report, he said, unless the food supplies were insured and the infrastructure improved very quickly, the senior aid officials do not think that Bangladesh could survive as a nation state. I mean, the picture that was painted then was extremely negative. So the fact that didn't happen, and Bangladesh has become self-sufficient in basic food grains and developed far better than people expected, despite the setbacks. There was a famine in 1974, but that was partially man-made. And I don't mean man-made by people here, but man-made by people like Henry Kissinger. And then when you think about the political turmoil with the assassination in 1975 and what happened after that, then when I've been interviewed before, I've said that the development has been remarkable. It could have been more remarkable if there hadn't been confrontational politics. I think the biggest concern for people like me who look at humanitarian situation is the gap between the rich and the poor. I saw a report not long ago that in 1972 there were 5 Bangladesh millionaires, and now there are nearly 100,000. So, and we see in living in this part of town, we saw different businesses, shops closing down because of the pandemic. Now we see more and more restaurants and coffee bars and springing up all over the place, and I wonder who is going there. I can't afford to go there. I can't afford to go to these fancy coffee places in Gulshan Avenue or Road 11 in Banani. So there is a concern about that sort of thing. More attention to those people who have nothing or who have less. I have done a lot of work over the years related to disability. So although more is being done, not nearly enough is being done, and so there should be more welfare assistance. And as you know, officially people can go to government hospitals or medical centres and get free treatment, but it's not available. You go there and then you may get free doctor's examination, but then you have to go and buy all the medicine and the bandages and everything else yourself. Well, many people can't afford that. 20 years ago, I wasn't in the same apartment, but living in Banani, we would have power cuts all the time. Electricity problems all the time. And then we would need the emergent, what do you call it, IPS or?
Generator or IPS.
Yeah. During the BNP time, 2001 to 2006, I was living in a flat nearby Hawa Bhavan. There was no electricity problem then. But even then, I had to get an IPS during the caretaker government time. But otherwise, during Hawa Bhavan time, we had no power cut.